This is Far From Home. I'm Scott Gurian. So, as you know, if you've been listening to the show, I'm taking a break right now, and I've been planning to spend this time doing some more traveling to gather stories for my upcoming season. I was supposed to fly to Morocco last Wednesday, spend several weeks there, then go to Algeria and South Africa. But now, because of coronavirus, all that's been canceled. And it's a good thing, because as much as I love traveling, with everything going on right now, there's no place I'd rather be than in the comfort of my own home. Plus, if you've been following the news for the past few days, you might have heard about all the tourists who've gotten stranded abroad after flights were canceled and many countries sealed off their borders. In fact, Morocco was one of those places where thousands of foreigners got stuck, so I quite easily could have been one of them. Thankfully, after some coverage of the issue in the New York Times, the American embassy began arranging special flights late last week to bring its citizens home. But Morocco was just the tip of the iceberg. There were reports of elderly British tourists stranded in the mountains of Peru facing health problems and running low on medication. There was an American women's football team trapped in Honduras, and more than 700 Canadians reportedly stuck in Iran. Here's one traveler's story.
My name is Andrew Jacott. I am from St. Paul, Minnesota, and my goal is to get out of the country once a year. I think traveling makes us more informed citizens. I think it makes us more empathetic, and I just love understanding new cultures and kind of seeing the world around me. I actually had been considering a trip to Nepal, but decided against it because I thought with coronavirus, it was too close from a proximity standpoint. And so that's why I chose to not go to those areas. Guatemala had no cases. That was something that I was monitoring as I was preparing to travel. Central America, in fact, didn't really have any cases. It was at that point much more isolated to Asia and China. I also, was referencing the U.S. Department of State, understanding travel advisories, all that stuff, none of which kind of had any sort of citation for Guatemala. I arrived here on the 9th, and at first things were very business as usual here. All the shops were open, all the tourists were out. There was really kind of no sense of real urgency about the situation. But things escalated extremely quickly. The first thing was that American Airlines canceled my flight home, and the president of Guatemala started to not allow people to come into the country. And at first, I was trying to temper my anxiety and just say, okay, I need to get home. I don't need to get here. I'm okay. I rebooked through Delta. Delta canceled that flight. And at that point, I really knew that I was in trouble. I hired a private driver to get me from San Pedro to Guatemala City, trying to get it on the next available flight. I got to the airport at 4 a.m. for my 6 a.m. flight, and the airport was completely closed. Doors were shut. There were a couple of employees kind of peeking their heads out of the doors and just saying nobody's flying today. So at that point, I had to regroup. I had been in contact with a few other travelers. They were working with a travel agent in the United States. They recommended trying to cross the Belize border and fly out of Belize. Before doing so, I checked with The Guardian, I checked with the New York Times, I checked with Wikipedia to try to understand if there were any travel restrictions in Belize. None of them had any information. As I was further researching the trip, I learned via a Belize radio station that they had also restricted their borders on the same day as Guatemala. So I relocated to Antigua. It's very close to Guatemala City, so if I need to get to the embassy or contact the embassy again, I can. It's a tourist destination, so there's a lot of resources here for tourists. So that's kind of why I chose to be here. I also have been in contact with a lot of travelers. Everyone's taking to Facebook because we can't get any good answers from the embassy or our government about what's happening. I'm not saying that they're not working. I'm sure everyone's working at breakneck speed, but there's just been a real lack of communication. A lot of the travelers are trying to make a run for the Mexican border. It's still technically open. As I said, we're just trying to grasp at straws here without any real communication. I entertained the idea of going to Mexico last night. I've notified my embassy. I tried to get in contact with them. I received a response from a U.S. security officer here in Guatemala who did not recommend crossing the Mexican border due to security issues and crime in that area where you'd be crossing into. So based on that recommendation, I have decided to stay put in Antigua. Basically, I have resolved myself to just waiting it out. It's a really scary thing to have your ability to move from place to place, to be where you want to be, where you feel safe, where you feel comfortable, cut off. To have that completely restricted is a pretty intense feeling. I am sitting in a hotel room with some pretty extreme anxiety, really unsure of what's coming next or when I'll get home at all. It's been real highs and lows. There's these flurries of activity when you have to make decisions super fast without the correct information. And then you kind of go into this more waiting mode where, you're kind of feet up, using basically your full day to coordinate calls with politicians and media. So that's been what my days have been looking like. I was supposed to go home on the 18th. So I should be in the office today. It's a little weird not to be. I would love nothing more to just be sitting in my apartment right now doing one of those menial tasks that you kind of don't love to do. Sounds fantastic.
So that was where things stood on Friday afternoon. I checked back in with Andrew a few days later, and it was a totally different story. Hey, Andrew, how are you?
I'm doing well.
In the last few days since I spoke to you, a lot has changed. So I guess, do you want to start at the beginning and kind of walk me through, like after we spoke, what happened?
Sure thing. So on the afternoon of the 20th, I received contact from House of Representative Betty McCollum's office that there was going to be a charter flight on the evening of the 21st at 10:30 p.m. I almost didn't believe it. There were just so many times in this situation where you see a possibility and then it is taken away. So the whole time that you're kind of like waiting for that charter flight, you're just thinking in your head, what if this doesn't go through? What if it doesn't work? What if this is just another one of those situations? And it wasn't something that had been publicized. It wasn't something that the embassy told me about or communicated in their emails. And so it was kind of an ordeal of a flight just because the airport's closed. So you actually, for a good chunk of time, you're waiting outside the airport to be let in. It ended up being a 2 a.m. boarding and then a 3:15 in the morning departure from the airport. So bit of a crazy flight, but there was definitely some applause when, the plane left the ground. I'm back in Minnesota, which feels really good. Feels amazing to just kind of do the really normal things like sit on your couch and open a bottle of wine and, just be in your space.
Thanks to listener Sadie May for putting me in touch with her friend Andrew Jaycott. Now, before I leave you, I have a personal story I wanted to share, and it's kind of an ironic twist of fate. As I mentioned at the beginning, I canceled all my travel plans as I saw the situation getting worse because I figured I'd be safer right now staying at home. But things didn't quite turn out the way I expected. You see, I live with a few housemates, and one of them returned a little over a week ago from a trip to California. A few days later, she got sick, first with a slight fever, then with some pressure in her chest and a bit of trouble breathing. The rest of us living in the house followed all the protocols we'd heard we should follow in this situation. We kept her mostly confined to her room, leaving food and tea outside her door. We used a different bathroom whenever we could, and we got into a routine of thoroughly sanitizing the house. All the doorknobs, light switches, sink faucets, and everything else that we regularly touched. Unfortunately, despite our best efforts, a few days later, I somehow managed to catch this from her as well. Now, I'd already had a flu shot, and this was much different and more severe than any seasonal allergies I've ever had, so it was concerning. Plus, our symptoms seemed to line up with what we had heard about COVID-19. So we both called our doctors, who told us that since there was such an overwhelming demand for testing, we should simply stay home and away from other people unless things got worse. So that's what we did. 1 week later, I'm happy to say we're both now recovering, but it wasn't pleasant. To paint a picture, last Friday afternoon, before things got too bad, I went for a short jog around the neighborhood to get some fresh air, staying as far away from other people as possible, and I felt fine, but just 24 hours later, I could barely walk down the block without having to turn back because I was totally out of breath. There were also some days when I felt enormous fatigue and had that telltale sign, the dry cough we've all heard about. It was pretty scary, and I'd be worried particularly about people who are older or have weaker immune systems to battle this off. Now, I should be clear that even though I ended up getting sick without even going anywhere, I still think I made the totally right decision by canceling my travels, because I certainly wouldn't have wanted to risk this happening while I was somewhere abroad dealing with foreign doctors in an unfamiliar medical system. I'm really glad I've been able to heal in my own house while sleeping in my own bed. So, having said all that, there's one more thing I want to say before I leave, and it's a super important point. Even now that my housemate and I are getting better, all of us who live here are continuing to follow the advice of the medical experts and take every precaution we can, starting with not leaving the house and driving anywhere unless absolutely necessary. Unfortunately, I've been chatting with friends online and by phone the past few days, trying to convince them to do the same, and at times, I feel like I've been facing an uphill battle. Some people seem to be in denial about how bad the situation really is. They think they're young, so this doesn't really pose a threat to them. They feel compelled to go visit family members, or in some cases, they're just plain stubborn. And it's really frustrating and disheartening. I live just outside of New York City, in the most densely populated part of the United States. And let me tell you, the situation here is getting really bad really quickly. And it's starting to spread more to other parts of the country as well. I know all this might seem somewhat remote and theoretical to you, depending upon where you're listening to me right now, but I'm begging you to please take this as seriously as possible. So if you need to check in on someone, use the phone or the internet, or even stay connected with them all day if they live alone and just need some company. If you need something important, consider ordering it or getting it delivered instead of going out to the store. And try to keep enough food in the house to minimize the frequency with which you have to go shopping. Trips and plans can be rescheduled, and at some point we'll all be able to go back to living our normal lives. But for the time being, just try to stay put, be patient, and wait things out. You could use this time to plan your next adventure, or maybe learn a new language, do those repairs around the house you've been meaning to do, or pick up a new hobby. Because the more we all follow the rules and stay away from each other, the sooner we'll be able to get this virus under control and go back to doing all the things we love to do. So please, listen to all the warnings, try to limit in-person contact as much as possible, and do what you're supposed to do. And let me know how you're spending the quarantine. Is there some sort of activity or creative project you're doing now that you have extra free time? And what's the situation like in your part of the world? Drop me a line at info@farfromhomepodcast.org, or better yet, record a short voice memo on your phone and send it to me at that address, and I might include it on a future show. Until next time, stay safe and stay healthy.